Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast. Today, I would love to introduce Kimberly Braun. Kimberly Braun, impelled from earliest childhood experiences, has spent over a decade as a monastic nun exploring the path of presence. With a master's in theology, she lives to inspire others to connect to and to live from divine love at their center. She's a TEDx speaker and former meditation faculty at the renowned Omega Institute. Welcome, Kimberly, to the A Little Less Fear podcast.
Thank you. Great to be with you. It's awesome to be here.
You know what, Kimberly, what song was coming to my mind this morning when I was thinking about this interview and having you on and finally meeting you, is this Nat King Cole song. I see trees are green,
All
red
right.
roses
Roses
too.
do
I see them bloom for
for
me
me and
and you.
you.
And I
And I
think to
think to
myself, what a
a
wonderful
wonderful world.
world.
Isn't that Louis Armstrong?
Oh my goodness, it is originally sang by Louis Armstrong, and the version that I had in my mind was a Nat King Cole
Nat
version.
King Cole. I'm gonna have to Google that. I love Nat King Cole. I didn't know he sang it.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong though. Maybe it was Louis
No,
Armstrong, and I'm thinking
no.
Nat King Cole.
So I don't know. I'll find out.
Oh my goodness. Either way, I felt inspired, and that's the song that came through for me, from me to you. So thank you for this inspiration. Well, happy holidays to you and your loved ones. I'd love to know your journey. What brought you to where you are at today, Kimberly?
Wow. Well, at 56 years old, that's a wonderfully illuminative long story,
Yeah.
isn't it? But I would say one key essential ingredient has been that I mentioned from my youngest years in my bio. I had some very, very deeply transformative experiences. At that time, I would have said of God. And now that word God is kind of a pointer towards something I am less certain I can describe, that revealed to me that all life and my life included in that is all about being and becoming in this spirit, period.
Oh, I
Being and
love that.
becoming in this spirit. And that we are the embodiment of consciousness, and where
Yes.
consciousness in us is coming more and more into form. And as we awaken into it, as we wake up into it, we then realize who we are and why we're here. And where we don't realize that, it's something very simple. It's just ignorance. We just haven't woken up to it yet. So
Sure.
that brought me, that's been a part of my life ever since my youngest years. It's taken a lot of different shapes and forms. It's been kind of the container in which I've navigated my life to this point. And now at this point, I am of service nationally and internationally. I lead retreats. People bring me in to offer inspired messages. I have online community. I have 3 books. Anything that uses communication, which is one of my gifts, as a means for people to touch into themselves. So they may hear what I'm saying, but hopefully when I say something that strikes them, I fall away and they simply touch into the source at their very center.
Oh my goodness. I love this, Kimberly. And I love what you just said right now, that we are the embodiment of consciousness. How did you come to this feeling? How did you realize that we are the embodiment of consciousness?
So my language around that is probably shifted in the last 10 years, but I would say that it has been an implicit part of my experience, my mystical experience. So like when I had the experiences when I was little, without realizing it, having those insights of being and becoming in God, that's all embodiment. Being and becoming is something
Truth.
that we
Yeah.
in this form and beyond this form are doing in this time, space, place.
Right.
And we are simultaneously not limited by time, space. So, as you know, with the many miracles that have happened in your own life. And so I think that it's implicitly been there. And it's only been in these last 10 years that my language has found a groundedness in that kind of definition. For instance, my definition of God has changed a lot. And my present definition, if somebody says, "Who's God to you?" or "What is God?" because I'm not with any lineage anymore, I'd say God is that whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere.
God is that whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere.
Correct.
I love this and I feel it. Can we talk a little bit more about this? But you know what? Actually, Kimberly, this is your new definition. God is that whose center is everywhere and, and circumference is nowhere. Before this was your new definition, how did you define God before?
I think I moved from a clear experience of a personal God that was immanent and transcendent, but I had those defined, immanent and transcendent. And I would say, like, my prayers were to the transcendent. And in that surrender over and over again, so I grew up Catholic Christian, which was actually a powerful tradition for me because its sacramental look on life views everything as potential grace. And the way the practices are set up opened me up to the unknown over and over again, opened me up to the mystery of life. So for me, it was very powerful. But at that time, I would say my prayers were about union with, right? Union
Oh,
with. Break me open to have union with God. Let me walk with Jesus. Let me be filled with the Holy Spirit. And in the evolution of my own path, very subtly, I experienced more and more, like all mystics do, and that is that my very center actually is God.
I
Now, it
love
doesn't mean that
this.
me as an individual, right? I don't say, "Kimberly, hello, you're meeting God." Like, I
Right,
could
right.
probably do that playfully, but, I could come off as pretty delusional. But there's an elemental pulse that I am alive because the God source is at my very center.
This is
And
beautiful.
yeah, thank you. So it's very much mystery, but I can give descriptors and words towards how that has evolved.
I love how you speak. And so you were able to see this and view everything as potential grace. What is grace to you?
That is such a great question. And in my new book, one of my foundational messages is everything is grace.
Let's
And
talk
so
about this.
it really begs the question, well, what are you
Yeah,
talking about that everything is grace?
yeah.
And I would say that grace, and again, this is like a poetic descriptor, that grace is the interconnected energy of creation that is the pulse of the divine.
Grace is the interconnected energy of, come again,
Creation.
creation that is the pulse of the divine. That is so poetic.
Thank you. You could really just take a whole hour and just unpack that one phrase, right? It's
Oh
like
my
it's so
goodness,
potent.
it is. And it's interesting that we're talking about this because I mentioned grace in the first
Yes, you
sentence of
did.
this poem too that I wrote. So yeah. So and in seeing that everything is potential grace, meaning that there's in this interconnected energy of creation. Creation and creativity the same?
No, I would say creativity is our participation in the divinity of our being,
Okay.
and creation is what we identify as existing, right? And existing is kind of fluid, right? Because we
Right.
used to talk about existing as here's my hand, and that exists, right?
Right.
But then science is teaching us that what creation is much more fluid than it is solid. So creation is not as solid as we think it is, but I think it does have an existence to it, right? There's a pattern that you and I are talking. There's something happening here
Right.
that actually is truly happening. And that's creation in motion.
Creation in motion. Oh my goodness, Kimberly, I love this.
I should write these things down. I'm like, I should have to remember
Right.
that one.
Yes, this is creation in motion. And right now, as I can feel your your inherent divinity flowing through you. What does it feel like for you to be speaking such beautiful language so fluidly, gracefully, and lovingly? What does this energy feel like to you?
It makes my heart happy. It inspires me. I feel, and my experience is this delightful dance. So, my word for the ineffable or source or universal life energy or God or creator, my language is very beloved oriented. And in speaking and having words come through me, it's like a dance with the beloved. That's
Yeah.
how it feels. Yeah.
And so in your dancing with the beloved, in this beautiful waltz that you have with the beloved, when you feel belovedness energy coming through you, flowing through you, does it feel that it's coming from inside or from the outside, or do you feel it both ways?
Both. And in diverse ways. I think as we open, I'm speaking generally, but I can, it's specific to me too, that as we open ourselves to the immensity of our being, we discover there are diverse ways that this spirit movement happens. You know, I've had my crown chakra open and been rushed with white light. I've had a word, a prophetic word bubble up in my heart, and my heart starts racing until I say the word. I've had the gentle perm and interpenetration when I lead meditation of coming to a great place of expansiveness. So those are all different textures and different ways that this is all happening. So I would say without and within.
I love this, Kimberly. Oh my goodness. And I'm feeling all of this. This is really beautiful. My goodness. I feel so blessed right
Oh,
now. Thank you for your
oh, me
presence.
too. I can feel you too.
Thank you. And so I have actually a few questions. I'm trying to figure out which. You know what? I'm gonna be super open here. So I had a guest on my show who specializes in love languages. And he at the very end we sent each other some email messages, and he thanked me for the experience of being on my podcast and stuff. And I told him that I love the topic of love because I have a goal to be a motivational speaker on the topic of self-love. And his his response actually made me question what is self-love at the moment, because he said to me, he asked me if I can help him understand how self-love is not selfish. He said Jesus didn't teach self-love. Jesus taught to love everybody, not to he never said anything about self-love. And so he wanted me to explain to him how I was not being selfish by talking about self love if it's not in the context of self care or hygiene or anything like that, that it's still, I guess, doesn't really serve the highest divine purpose. I'm not really sure after that, because I basically I sent him an email and I let him know what I felt self love was and how I came to be and what I went through to find myself. And it was in me finding myself and self love that I was able to radiate and love everybody and even find more love unconditionally. But he didn't respond. And
Mm,
and so I feel I'm very I can feel people's energies, and I can feel that either he's still thinking about it or he just doesn't have much to say past this. But I'm kind of in a little in some way I'm a little shocked because he one of the love languages is communication. And
mm,
so I just feel, if you're really that open about
yeah.
creating something and even writing a book about love languages, where it would be ideal to respond with love and grace on someone's response to your question on what my definition of why I want to talk about self-love. And so I thought this was a perfect avenue to bring it up with you. What is self-love to you? How do you feel it is, what it is, and where does it come from? Do we need it? What is self-love?
I don't think, uh, first of all, I really appreciate the question because I can speak only to the Western psyche and woundedness around this. I'm not Eastern, I'm Western. And
Sure.
with the Western experience, there is an incredible amount of wounding
Yeah.
around this issue and this question, because there is a dualism that has arisen in many interpretations of spiritual teachings that says things like it's better to give than to receive, or
Yes.
adages like that that reinforce a displacement of focus upon the self.
Right.
And with that, I don't think those passages, if they were ever spoken, were intended to divide, like, I love you, I have to focus on you instead of me. I think I focus on you because of the love of my being that I'm experiencing. And I think what some of these teachings are that encourage us to look beyond the focus on ourselves is because very often in our growth process, we will begin to give a lot of energy to a false sense of who we are. We'll lean into a security of I'm good at this, and our self-worth will get tied to that. And ultimately that
Yeah.
identity will let us down. Oh, I'm really generous because I go work at the shelter once a week. And there's something beautiful in that to celebrate about our motivation. But sometimes we can then lean into our identity with it as a way of feeling okay about ourselves.
True.
And ultimately, I believe those things fall away, and we are called to discover that we actually are love,
Right.
that we're coming from an eternal source of love, and we are the expression of that love. And in being the expression of that love, it's it's requisite to
Right.
love that. It's requisite to love that self. And then I think as we grow, we have this self with a little s, the Kimberly, and the self with the big S, which is the ineffable. And in my discovery that my center is this big S self, it becomes a little bit merged, and
Right.
we identify with the self-love that celebrates the divine. And then we discover where real humility is, because we don't tend to get puffed up about things, but we're innocent like children who can celebrate goodness. I
Yeah.
mean, children, I love seeing children, like, let's say they first learn to jump rope,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Oh, I jumped rope. I
Right.
jumped rope." No one's really looking at that child saying, "You're really arrogant." They're like,
Right.
"Yay, you did it." I think that's what
Right.
we're called to, is to be able to celebrate the goodness that we are. But the path to that is to heal our misconceptions about who we are and what we are. So I see it as more nuanced, but I do see that self love is the place from which we are free, and free to love all in a way that's most aligned with spirit.
So you feel that self-love, is that from a place where we are free to love ourselves, and what was the
And
last one?
others,
And
and
others.
others in
And
a way
that's
that is aligned with spirit. Yeah.
how do you define spirit?
Yeah, these are such great questions, right?
Oh,
So
thank
many
you.
different ways. But I would say spirit is the agency of that is the pulse of the divine. It's the agency. I think spirit in my mind is kind of the workings of spirit, the workings of the divine. I'm aligned in spirit, meaning I'm aligned to my divinity. And the agency of that awakening is really the ineffable that I might call spirit, even though I'm participating as my individual self in it.
And so spirit is more of the workings of the divine. It's all an encompassing energy.
Yeah, I would be interested in your definition. It is the divine, but it's also maybe a quality in this creation of the divine that has a specificity to it. It's kind of got you could think of spirit as like kind of the wind blowing, right? There's a certain
Yeah.
agency and a movement.
So it's such as all the elements, air, water, all of that spirit.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel this. All of the things that nature has to offer is all part of the spiritual divine.
Mhm.
And that's why we are all one with spirit. And so, how would you define the difference between? I can feel into this, but I'd like to know your thoughts. The difference between a soul and spirit. A lot of people say, "Well, is there a spirit in the house?" Or I feel a spirit, or are these good spirits or bad spirits? But in this context, we're seeing it more as in the workings of the divine, part of creation, part of the creative process that's having an equal ebb and flow between humanity and our existence with the divine. But for people listening to this for the first time, I can imagine that they would question, well, what is spirit when someone says there's a spirit here, or what's a soul in that case? What is the difference?
This is how I would point to those answers. I believe that each one of us is a soul, first and foremost. So
Yes.
the existence of me, regardless of whether I use the name Kimberly or not, but I'll use the name Kimberly because that's what I go by,
Okay.
that Kimberly is a soul. And that soul is having an experience that is a containment in a time space reality, while simultaneously not being bound by time and space, being multidimensional and beyond. So the soul is like the constitution of being. And I think that I don't know that I could quantify that with examples that are just using languages of time and space.
Okay.
Because I think that would fall short,
Sure.
because I love the word pattern, because I feel like in a way, even the way I look and this physical body, it's just a pattern.
Hmm.
It's just a pattern of
It is a
frequencies
pattern.
and
Yeah.
vibrations, right?
Exactly.
It's and it's kind of staying consistent. Like I generally look the same that I did when I was 4 years old. I mean, I'm a little taller, a little wider, but but
Kimberly,
if
I
you
don't
look
think
back,
I grew past 4 years old. I'm the same height. Anyways, go on.
no, it's great. Like I look back at picture, I'm like, that's the same smile. Those are the same exact
Yeah,
expressions in my eyes. Like,
exactly. It's almost like it's our energetic signature.
yes, I love that phrase. And so the soul has that as a way of participating in this dance that's happening. And the spirit is an interpenetrating agency in all things that doesn't even have that much of a pattern by way of its presence. It may have a pattern by the way that it's working with and moving with. And I would call that benevolence, which is very sophisticated. I'm thinking this through as we're speaking, because benevolence is an agency of good. There's kind of an orientation. And I think spirit has a quality of benevolent movement to it. For instance, you mentioned some beautiful things that were great graces in your life. I believe that that was the benevolent movement of spirit setting things up, orchestrating right time, right place, right person, right event, right thought, right moment. And I think that there was a high amount of involvement of spirit in that because of the integral benevolence of it.
And so spirit is an integral benevolence that can potentially guide us towards right. What is right and what is wrong?
And I don't use those distinctions so much, but I would say fullness or
Fullness.
awakening,
Okay.
fullness and awakening. Like aligned with spirit isn't so much a right or a wrong, it's more of a stepping into fullness or awakening into it. I think when we
I
when
feel
we
that.
penetrate these things, right, we move away from paradox, we move away from right and wrong, good and bad, dark and
Yes.
light.
Right, right. Yes, exactly. And so I hesitate in saying right. You know, we need to
So I
change
didn't mean,
that.
I hope that didn't sound like a correction. I was like,
Not
just
not at all. I'm correcting myself because a lot of this really is if we change our language, we start to feel into the frequency and the vibration of what other words mean, and that gives it more clarity in your
Yes.
expression and in the way that your mannerism, it basically becomes you. And so, I mean, there's definitely, I just wondered what else I could say besides you're right. And you're awake, Miss Kimberly. You're in your fullness. I love this.
Well, at least in this moment. Or for a
Exactly, at
moment.
least in this moment. And so, on the topic of fullness and awakeness, I'd like to talk about how people can step into their full potential of themselves. First of all, what is full potential?
This is coming, all these things are coming from my experience. So any attempted articulation is coming just from my experience of what's showing me to be true about these things.
Yes.
So if you're listening, I always like to say we've each got our own way of coming to our truth. And you only want to give your yes to what resonates with you. So, with that caveat, I would say coming to your full potential is that as a soul, coming into exist in this form, in this creation, there is there is a call that's happening. And that call is the divine pulse inviting us to expand and be the fullness of consciousness in form. And that potential is our setup. For instance, like when I experienced the call when I was 5 and that those illuminations, that was both an actualization moment. I woke up to it. I'm like, that's everything. But then I also recognized that I hit what my call to realize my potential was, because it was being and becoming. So our potential is the template in which we're coming to all that we can be in this call to be and become in God, or be and become as source or consciousness. The becoming part is the process part. So we're both perfect right where we are, and the fullness is right where we are. And that fullness is a call to further magnify into even it's not greater, it's not more, it's expansion. And we can tell when we are realizing ourselves, it's because there's a certain contentment, there's certain qualities. And we can tell that through dissatisfaction when there's something in our potential we're not being true to, or we're not answering the call to. For instance, most humans have a certain niggling for more. Wow,
Yes.
I just, like there's a certain stirring that'll happen, or a push that'll happen, or a dissatisfaction. That is our soul journey putting us into contact with, here's your potential. No, you're really called to live a life of great freedom. That freedom is the freedom to love all without bias, to love all from a place of stability and not giving away your power. In all sorts, we could go down that road with all those words. And so that realizing that potential is our greatest happiness. And we'll be dissatisfied if we choose not to open and surrender into it more. And we'll be fully satisfied the more we surrender into it.
Thank you. This is really, that's beautiful. I feel this
Oh,
definitely.
thank you.
And
Thank you.
so,
Thanks for letting me gush words.
oh, I love this. This is my favorite, Kimberly. This is my bread and butter. I love this stuff. And
Yay.
so and what I'm doing right now is I try to put myself in the ears or the feels. I actually do have some deaf friends that can't unfortunately listen to the podcast, so I will put this on YouTube with subtitles. But in this feeling, I'm trying to see what others would feel could feel from this, and if somebody doesn't know the difference between or being aware or in their fullness, that it's their if they're not living their full potential, it can show up in dissatisfaction or discourse or some type of negative feeling. And if somebody's not aware of that, how does someone start tapping into how they can start being in order to become? How does someone even know that they're not being when being is the answer to be present?
Mhm. So that's got a lot of practical answers to it. And first, I could start conceptually in saying there is something in our essential nature that is always going to strive to understand who we are and why we're here, that it's part and parcel for our journey. So there's
True,
going to
true.
be always this, to give a linear image, there's always going to be like this knock on the door, knock
There
on the
is
door.
always a knock on the door. Yeah.
And and so I think that we can rest into that. However, with that, there are a lot of, I've been teaching now for 23 years, so my toolbox around those answers is like massive.
Oh,
But
great.
some of the ways that we can open up more to the process is first, we reinforce. That means we start to notice when we have timeless moments. We start to notice when we have stirrings that we might call inspiration. And we make a choice to reinforce those. That means we make a choice to more of those. For instance, I've never met a human being, as much as they can say, oh my gosh, I'm not a mystic, I never have this. I've never met a human being that if I don't talk with them further, that there's not at least one moment in their life that they relaxed into a timeless state. It could be the birth of a child. It could be a sunset that took their breath away. It could be a moment of true convergence in harmony with something they were doing. But there will be a moment, and I can always help somebody find that moment. When it's like the Helen Keller experience. When we find that moment, I'm like, that's it. That's your essential nature right there. So then the questions can be, how do I reinforce that? How do I have more of those moments? And that then is through perspective and practice. We begin listening to podcasts like your great one and many others, talks that let us touch in on the resonance more, just to experience it, not to figure it out with our brains, just to experience it more. We can make a choice. Now, I'm a big meditation teacher, but there are many contemplative exercises that set us up for the capacity and the skillfulness to have more moments like that. We can choose to say, wow, well, my timeless moments always happen when I'm out in nature on a hike. Hike once a week.
Sure.
Like, make the choice, you know? So that's reinforce. That's one way. The other way is redirect. Redirecting is beginning to become attentive to when we are disassociating from this part of ourselves, which for many people is a majority of the time. We get locked into stress, we get locked into fears, we get locked into misconceptions about ourselves and reality, and it pulls us into contracted states. At that moment, there are many, many tools out there to help us redirect ourselves and our focus to open up again to our essential nature. And again, that could be a whole retreat, unpacking
Oh,
those
yeah.
many tools. And then the third is working towards redefining. So I mentioned the false self. There are many ways that we sell ourselves short. For instance, let's say we long for unconditional love, which I think pretty much all human beings
Yeah.
at heart really are longing for that.
Oh, yeah.
We can make all sorts of choices to have limited moments of connection where we get just this much love, and we choose not to leave that situation just because we're afraid we won't get any love. We compromise because we just get a little bit. That's placing a false security in something that sells us short from experiencing unconditional love. So that redefining, we can begin to learn, why am I so scared to be alone that I keep saying yes to relationships that don't let me grow in love?
Yeah.
So that's redefining who we are. So reinforce, redirect, and redefine. And then under that is like hundreds of, if not thousands of different tools that you can begin and try and see what works for you.
I love this. Reinforce, redirect, and redefine.
Correct.
That's beautiful. The 3 R's. This is incredible. I love all this. I've taken so many notes here. It's really
Oh, I feel
quite
so blessed. It's fun to talk about it.
it really is. And so a stirring is inspiration. And so once we get a stirring on something, it is then that is an open door, an open window of opportunity for us to see more of that touch of resonance that we've seen from time to time, and to expand on it and to explore more of our being so that we could be more flowing more readily with creation.
Yes. Yeah, it's a lovely way to articulate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And so in this mode of inspiration that okay, so first of all, I'm certain you've heard this because I've heard this where people say, "Well, I'm not creative, or I can't be creative." So and therefore I'm not really sure what inspires me. How can someone find what inspires them? Let's say that they're in nature and they're like, "Okay, well, I'm seeing nature. This is what brings me tranquility. This is what brings me some resonance, but I'm not feeling inspired for action. I'm not feeling inspired to do something next that's going to help me expand."
Right. So uh, there are many ways, but I want to point out one that I have always found very helpful for myself that I encourage people to do, and that is invest in a spiritual director slash companion. Now, because I do a lot of spiritual direction and I have always had somebody that's walking my path with me,
I love this.
this is, I don't like the word director because they're not directing, but that's the title of the formation. When you have a person that's your companion that is there at the service of your relationship with yourself and your relationship with your spirit, and that's all they're there for, they are going to reflect back to you answers that are helpful. That's a really
Yeah,
practical way to go about it. Yeah. Yeah.
I
And then
love
the
this.
second one is begin to take it seriously. We human beings, because we are so enculturated into stressful patterns, we'll get a stirring and immediately we'll disregard it. It feels too light.
Exactly.
It feels improbable. I could never follow that. I've got too much to think about to even care about that. What would happen to my life if I even opened up to the possibility of that? There's all these things that go whoosh, right? And we push
Sure.
it down. Take it seriously. Serious enough that you care that much about yourself, that you give it space to reveal something more of itself to you.
And in this seriousness, what I'm also feeling in it, and it could be, I mean, it's just I've never really used these two words hand in hand the way I'm going to use it now. But you could be joyfully seriously, and you could be serious with your joy.
Yes, yes, yes,
I've never thought about putting those two words together.
yes, totally. That's totally like it. It's,
If
yeah,
it's
that's very
you're
brilliant.
inspired, it's bringing you joy. Be more serious about your joy. Oh my
Yes,
gosh,
yes, yes, yes.
I love this. And so I'm gonna backtrack a little bit here. When we were talking about your journey to your full potential, you briefly mentioned how some things can take our power away. How do you define power?
That which impacts and influences, I suppose. That's off the cuff.
Okay.
Uh, and it's an elusive word because when we look at it in society's mechanisms, we see that a person can hold a position of power, meaning that when they say something, it's going to have impact.
Right.
When they make a decision, it's going to have impact. There's also a power that water has, right? They say water is one
Yeah.
of the most powerful forces in the world. And even though it seems the most fluid, it causes the most change, it has impact. And I believe that because we exist, we have a certain power, we have an impact. And we can give that power away in a way that when we care about something that is less than what we're meant for, we can orient our power to have impact in ways that's not helpful for us or others. And when we take our power back, we then have an agency that's aligned with spirit where our impact and our influence are benevolent, are benevolent, which is
And
the greatest impact we could have. And like Dan Millman put in the Peaceful Warrior in his book, he said the ultimate position of power is absolute vulnerability.
and why is that?
Because when we are 100% free, we are 100% intimate with all things. Now, I'm a beloved. That's my archetype, is like beloved, everything's a love affair. So
Sure.
I've got to use my language on that, right? Right. I believe that we're being touched by the beloved in everything. And I believe that we can touch with that same source, which is a power to it. Think about, there's this great quote that I've claimed as my own that mystics more than one has said in past years. Look with the beloved's eyes and you will see the beloved's face.
Yes.
So right there, I oriented my focus and my agency towards connecting with the beloved within so that my eyes look in that way. And
Right.
when my eyes look that way, they are going to see in that way. They're going to resonate with what they see and they're going to penetrate beyond other layers. And then in that connection, there's an intimacy and a vulnerability. And in that lies a form of power that upbuilds, that connects, that encourages.
Wow. As you said this, I pictured it was just so fast the way I imagined. As you said this, I just pictured a seed under soil and I just saw it expanding, growing out its roots and it turning to this beautiful sunflower. And so, and that's basically what's happening here when you're looking with the eyes of a beloved. That's the seed. You plant the seed and you look at someone else for their belovedness, and together you grow together and bloom together and reflect on one another, the beauty that you can create by being and sharing this integral, innate love that exists between one another. And this vulnerability is what causes the most powerful effect, which is which is what? One with the divine?
Right? Consciousness coming into form, right? The
Consciousness
fullness
coming
of
into
all
form.
things.
Yes, coming,
Yeah.
bringing it all back from to the beginning of this
Totally.
podcast episode. Yes. Consciousness in physical form. This is so magically beautifully. I love this.
It is beautiful.
My goodness. So because that was actually going to be my next question. Sometimes I'm ahead of myself. It's like I hear your magic coming out in this energetic verbal form, and right away I want to go on to the next question. And the next question was, what does it mean to be vulnerable? And you answered it without me. I mean, I guess because you were seeing me with your eyes of belovedness, and then therefore you were reflecting that, and I was feeling beloved. And it's because we're both beloved, you were able to answer my question without me verbalizing it. So thank you for that connection.
Yes.
That's amazing. And
Oh,
so I have a poem that I wrote. I tapped into your loving
great.
existence when I read your profile, and I wrote this yesterday actually. And so I sat into it. I did a prayer meditation. I have rocks that I feel into, and one of the rocks that I felt into with our energy here. It's this light blue rock. I forget the name of it, and a lot of the times I don't know the names of some of my stones. I just feel into their
Oh,
energy.
right.
It is Larimar. That's what it is, Larimar.
Okay.
And so I felt this energy. It felt really soft, and in this I was able to create this poem. And so it's called "Say Yes." Say yes. To say yes to your life is to say it with grace, to feel it with gratitude, and to savor it with patience. To say yes to your life takes compassion and mercy, forgiveness and perseverance, wisdom to let go and courage to let in. To say yes to your life is to open your arms, even if nobody is in front of you. To embrace your own arms. Say yes to your life. You deserve your own hug. And that's it.
Mm, mm,
Thank
that's
you,
so beautiful.
Kimberly.
It's so penetrating and it's so childlike too,
Oh yeah, definitely. When I write,
right?
and it's interesting you say that because I started writing when I was about 6, 7 years old. And when I don't know what I've written thousands of poems. I don't know what I did to any of those poems, but I remember being a teenager and looking back at the poetry I wrote as a kid, and I thought, where do these words come from? How does a 7-year old thinking like this? And to this day, I can't really say that I'm thinking when I'm writing. It's flowing through me, and um it's felt very fluidly, and it's felt with grace, and I'm vulnerable when I write, and I've got all the elements that Kimberly Braun just spoke on this podcast. So that's where my writing comes from. That's my inspiration.
I love that. That's great. Well, the other book I published this year is, look at this beautiful cover. It's called Beloved Found,
Oh my, that
Poems from
is
the
beautiful.
Source.
Beloved Found. Poems from the Source. Oh my goodness. Well, that looks like the
Isn't
next
that
book that I'm gonna get.
fun?
Speaking of that, tell us the 3 books that you have out. First, the one that you just showed me right now. It's called Beloved. Come again, the title of that book.
Beloved
Beloved
Found.
Found
And
and Poems from the Source. Oh my goodness, the
yeah,
alignment is so incredible.
it's so beautiful. And it's some of my poetry.
Oh my.
And I only put it into a book this year was because I use my poetry in my work in the world a lot. And people were starting to say, well, where can I get your book of poetry? And I'm like, here's a couple napkins I wrote this on,
Right, right. Yeah.
so I intend to, put it out in book form. And then the book that just came out a couple months ago is Miracles in the Naked Light.
Miracles in the Naked Light.
And you can get it in audio, my voice.
Oh,
You can get
excellent.
it in ebook, and you can get it in print. And it is marks a couple of the years during the time that I was a Carmelite monastic nun. And if you watch my TED talk, you'll see that I ended up building a monastery, being the general contractor with no experience and no money.
Wow.
And it marks the miracle of saying that yes, just like you just read in your poem. What happens when we really give the yes, when we really surrender? And so it plays that out, and it plays out the message of everything is grace. It plays out how in this world where we have contrast, right? Things that feel happy, things that feel sad, things that feel in the flow, things that feel blocked. We have all these contrasts. It shows the beautiful pattern of my evolving in my understanding of the divine by seeing everything as grace. And it evolved my mind more, and it healed my heart more, and it taught me things. So it's a great book. And then the third book I published years ago is called Love Calls. And that
Love
simply
calls.
gives the wonderful message of what I've discovered as true at the center of my own being through stories, how a fear was healed and how I answered a call to join a monastery. And it just gives fun stories that you can relate to in your own life.
This has been incredible. And where can our viewers, our watchers, our listeners, and our supporters find your incredible books?
Everything, I think probably the catch place, because you can get them on Amazon. But if you go to my website, kimberlybraun.com,
Okay.
everything's there, and it'll click you through to all your choices. And there you can connect with me on my newsletter. I have more than 600 videos. I do
Wow.
meditation immersions through the year. I have retreats. I have online courses. I have all sorts of things. So if you are listening and you want to connect with me. I do private work as well. So
You're busy, Miss Kimberly Braun.
full. I took that word busy out of my parlance because
Okay, it's full now? You're full.
I'm full. Like my plate's full. My life is really full. But you're right, it's overflowing full. It's overflowing full. I'm trying to pace with it. I'm like, ready. I'm like,
I like
okay.
that. So you changed the term from busy to full.
How often when you ask people how they're doing these days, oh, I'm so busy.
Yeah.
And it's got this kind of like, oh, feel to it. And I'm like, I don't want to add that energy in my life. So I changed how I talk about how full my plate is.
I'm gonna be changing that. I'm gonna be
Are
changing
you?
that. Oh, definitely. From now on forward. From now on
Oh.
forward. Yeah, definitely. And it makes sense because everything has an undertone, a different resonance, as we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
So I feel that undertone. Well, you definitely are full, and I can see and feel your fullness and awakeness. I love this. And thanks so much for inspiring me and inspiring our viewers, watchers, listeners, and supporters. Happy holidays to you and your loved ones. Happy New Year. I see your angelic wings. Thank you for sharing your angelic golden light with me. And oh yeah, do you have social media handles?
I do. Um, I can email them to you. I'm
Excellent.
on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and I post just about every day.
Okay, great. And would you
Something
happen to
small.
know your handle on Instagram?
It's '09, Kimberly Braun '09.
Kimberly Braun 09.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and I like Instagram the best right now, so
Definitely follow you there. And I'm looking forward to staying connected and getting your
same
awesome book of
here.
poetry. Thank you so
Same
much, Kimberly.
here.
Wishing you love, light, happiness, and keep shining. I
Mm.
love your energy.
You
Thank you.
too.
Take care now.
Blessings. Bye.